Chapter 1. 26-year-old Leon Wolfe was a married man whose dishonor was well known across Springfield City. He lived with his wife's family, the Mansons, and was treated like a slave during his 3-year marriage. Dignity was something foreign to him, but he finally had enough of it one fateful night. For the past 3 years, he worked like a horse in the Mansons' company every single day, and his salary had to be handed over to his wife, Marilyn, whom he could not even get without touching distance. By the time he came home at night, he had to do laundry, mop, cook, and do all sorts of housework. Still, he worked hard without complaining. He thought that doing all that would allow him to prove his worth to his wife and convince her to stay with him until they grew old. But what he received in exchange was a big gift: a baby. His wife, whom he never once had the chance to get within touching distance of, was pregnant, and he was about to be a father. Would anyone consider that good news, though? "Is it that hard to wash the clothes, clean or mop the floor?" "Well, Leon?" You're useless. Can't you do anything right? Why should we let you stay with us when a dog would have done better than you?" The harsh words came from Leon's mother-in-law, Helen Manson. She pointed a finger at his face while she chastised him like there was no tomorrow. Leon looked up and his eyes were bloodshot due to anger. "Helen," Leon gritted his teeth and suppressed the voice in his throat. "Don't call me by my first name. You are not worthy to be addressing me like that." Helen had an expression of disgust and contempt. Leon remained silent and refrained from talking back. 3 years ago, he happened to chance upon the Manson's patriarch when the latter's illness acted up all of a sudden. Elder Manson, as he was known, was carried to the hospital on Leon's back for about 8 miles or so. The old man received treatment in time and was thus saved by Leon's kindness. Elder Manson probably felt it prudent to repay the favor by marrying off his granddaughter, Marilyn, to Leon. Everyone else in the family opposed it, but the old man turned a deaf ear to them. Since then, Leon stayed with the Mansons for 3 years. 3 years! Even the coldest of people would warm up to someone in those 3 years, but it was impossible to do anything with that bitter mother-daughter duo. Marilyn and her family looked down on him from the bottom of their hearts, simply because he was an orphan, with 0 prospects and no family background. Despite his best efforts, Marilyn and the others continued to nitpick, smack, and scold him at every turn. Elder Manson was the only person in the entire family who treated him well. When Elder Manson was around to protect him, his mother-in-law, Helen, was able to restrain herself, but only a little. Ever since Elder Manson passed away from illness a month ago, Helen and everyone else had practically stepped up their efforts to drive him away. He became a redundant existence in the family and spent his days being treated worse than a dog. The room door swung open and Marilyn walked in, reeking of alcohol. Clad in fashionable clothes and black silk stockings, the gait of her long legs and her seductively blushing face was irresistible to almost every man. Since she was back, Leon looked up at her and felt a surge of pain from his aching heart. He could not fathom how she could bring herself to go out for some drinks, even when she was pregnant. Leon's first instinct was to head up and support her, but Marilyn immediately shoved him away. "Hands off me! Pack up your stuff right now and get the hell out of here! We're getting a divorce at the Civil Records Office tomorrow!" "What? Why?" At that point, Helen showed up and began cursing at Leon as soon as she saw him standing there in a phase. "What are you doing, Leon? Bring over a basin of water and start washing Lulu's feet." Helen walked over to Marilyn with a doting expression on her face. She then held the woman's hand in the gentlest of manners and asked, worried, "Why are you drinking so much alcohol? It's not good for the baby. You put in so much effort to finally get pregnant with Brody's son, so you mustn't let anything happen to him." She suddenly looked forward to having a grandson, even though the baby was still months ahead of the due date, because only a boy would give her daughter a chance to become Brody's wife. The only reason she kept Leon around was that she was unsure about the baby's gender. After all, someone needed to take care of her daughter, and a babysitter would cost extra money. "Don't bother washing my feet. I've suffered enough from your uselessness for the past 3 years, Leon. Let's get divorced tomorrow." Marilyn looked at Leon with a cold, arrogant, and contemptuous expression. Leon immediately felt as if his heart was pierced by thousands of arrows. He knew that he was not worthy of Marilyn, and yet he continued to work hard and endure everything for 3 years in the hopes of getting Marilyn's approval. Little did he know that he would receive a request for divorce in exchange for all his hard work. "You're right," Helen understood soon enough. "After all, we have Brody's child now, and it's going to tarnish our reputation if news gets out that he's still living with us." "I'm tired. Could you walk me to my room so I can rest? The sight of this idiot disgusts me." Marilyn stroked her stomach tenderly and began worrying whether other women around Brody would try to interfere with them once her belly got bigger. As Helen helped Marilyn into the room, she took a jibe at Leon. "Why are you still here? Are you going to stay around and take care of a baby that isn't yours?" In that split second, humiliation, anger, and a plethora of other negative emotions began to overwhelm Leon's heart. He felt like an abandoned stray that was chased out mercilessly from its home. All his belongings from 3 years of marriage, including his ID card, were thrown into the trash can, and Leon's strongest emotion right then was that of bitter disappointment. He was homeless. In those 3 years, his earnings from work were handed in full to his mother-in-law, and he was never given a single cent. He was the same as a wild dog. Leon wandered on the street and ended up at a cemetery, where he felt the cold air within the darkness. He stood in front of a tombstone, with a lonely expression and widened eyes, but not a single tear was shed. He did not know whether to feel anger, despair, or disappointment. He looked silently at the tombstone of the late Elder Manson, the only person who protected him and took care of him during those 3 years. After being kicked out of the house, Leon felt to pay his respects to the old man one last time. Although the purpose of his visit was to pay his respects, he did not have any money on him and could not even afford to buy the cheapest flowers. "Thank you for taking care of me these 3 years, sir. I'm going to divorce Marilyn tomorrow. I failed to live up to your expectations." Leon's eyes were red. He knelt in the dark of the night and bowed to Elder Manson's tombstone several times in a row. It was difficult to put the bitterness and sadness in his heart into words. Once he paid his respects, he took a pendant, held it in his hand, and sat blankly on the ground, with his back against the tombstone. Unbeknownst to Leon, the pendant seemed to glow with white light, almost as if it could sense the anger and humiliation within him. Chapter 2. Leon proceeded to leave the cemetery, after paying his respects to Elder Manson. But before he stepped out of the place, he spotted a beautiful woman in office wear standing at the entrance. She had a beautiful figure, and Leon wondered why someone like her would visit the cemetery in the middle of the night instead of being sound asleep in bed. She used heavy makeup too, prompting him to do a double take at her. She seemed unhappy and muttered something along the lines of, "Broke-ass bastard." Leon usually ignored such remarks in the past because he did not stand to gain anything anyway, if he reacted to them. However, the surprise his wife gave him by getting pregnant with someone else's son and his expulsion from the house made him incredibly upset. He wanted to vent his feelings. In a hot-headed moment of impulsiveness, he ran to the woman and said, "Rather early of you to be offering yourself out on the street. How much do you charge for a night? I just so happen to be in a good mood today." Truth be told, Leon did not have a single cent in his pocket. He trembled a little when he spoke and was worried that she was a hooker, because then he would not have anything to pay her with. Luckily for him, the beautiful woman's face turned ashen, and she stared at Leon after hearing his statement. She was prim and proper woman, it seemed. Leon felt secretly relieved. He suffered a lot at the Mansons that day, and he already hit rock bottom. When he saw the woman glaring at him, he added another sentence. "What are you staring at? Didn't you hear my question? I asked you how much you're charged for a night. What's wrong? Are you expecting to be shown some dignity, even though you're out here selling yourself? I used to do combat training, you know, so you're the one who should be thanking me for a good time instead." That remark made the woman even angrier, and she immediately yelled, "What's your name? Which company are you from?" "What's it to you?" Were you thinking about coming right to my place? Leon would not foolishly just tell random people about him. How dare you? The woman's face turned red with anger, but she had no choice other than to run away from Leon, leaving the latter feeling very resentful. As Leon turned to leave, he saw two shady young people sneaking into the cemetery. They were each holding a sack and a rope. They did not see Leon because the place was too dark, and the surroundings were blocked by trees and tombstones. Any smart person could see that those two people were up to no good. Leon frowned and summarized that they were after the woman, and so decided to follow them secretly. Sure enough, the beautiful woman who seemed to be waiting in the cemetery was immediately attacked from behind by the two men, and stuffed right into the sack. Her mouth was stuffed with a pair of stinking socks, and all her struggling and resistance were in vain. Soon one of the stronger men held down the woman, while the other brought a huge and heavy stone and tied it to the sack. The two of them then lifted the stone and threw it into the river with a plop. Leon's pupils widened. It was murder! Leon's first instinct was to run away, but he was worried that he would startle the men through any sounds he made while doing so. As a result, he kept hiding behind the tombstone and waited until the two men left before sticking his head out cautiously. After giving it some thought, Leon jumped into the water. He might be a cowardly man, but the values instilled into him since childhood meant that he could not just stand by and watch a weak woman being killed right in front of him. Leon rescued the woman from the water in no time. He ignored the fact that he was wet and panting and untied the sack immediately. Unfortunately, he did not notice that he was just beside a dagger dropped by one of the men. Elsewhere, the two young men went all the way to the road outside the cemetery, where a high-end luxury SUV was parked. The two men were about to get into the car and leave when Marco subconsciously reached out for his boots. His expression changed in an instant. Dang, I dropped my dagger. It's probably somewhere by the river. We need to hurry up and get it back. There are fingerprints on it. The two men ran back toward the river. When Leon opened the sack, the woman inside was already soaking wet. Her white top and short hip-hugging skirt were all wet, clinging tightly to her body, and accentuating her curvy and exquisite figure. Her top, in particular, revealed vague traces of her small black lace bra. It was a sight to behold. Leon could not help but gulp. He thought that Marilyn was already a beautiful enough woman, and he never would have expected the woman in front of him to surpass Marilyn's beauty by a mile. The woman was underwater for long enough that her face was pale, and she could not even breathe. There was nothing Leon could do except put one hand on her ample bust and give her some mouth-to-mouth respiration. To his surprise, her bust was soft, and her lips were even softer, the latter with almost a hint of sweetness to them. Leon could not help but fantasize even more. Moments later, Leon finally resuscitated her. Bleh! The woman coughed out several mouthfuls of water. Her eyelashes trembled slightly, and she finally regained her senses. The woman could sense a warmness on her lips. When she raised her head again, she saw Leon's hand stroking her leg, so she kicked him to the river in a fit of anger. She even scolded him. What do you think you're doing, feeling me up like that, you pervert? Disgusting! Leon was caught by surprise and ended up falling into the water. He thrashed and flailed a couple of times in the river before successfully climbing back ashore. At that moment, he looked even more pitiful than before. He suffered so many wrongs that day and looked at the woman with an enraged expression. He did not even bother to explain what happened to her. Women are all the same. I saved you and gave you mouth to mouth, but rather than thank me, you kicked me into the river? Didn't your parents teach you anything? I think I ought to punish you on behalf of your father, Leon said, and strode up to her. The woman started to panic, and her whole body, including her chest and voice, trembled. Hey, quit messing around! If somebody did something to her in such a desolate area and threw her back into the water, no one would be able to find any evidence. Leon then snatched her water-damaged cell phone and car keys. He destroyed her cell by smashing it hard on the ground, and then threw the car key into the water. Let's see you act tough now, Leon said angrily. You're an ungrateful one, aren't you? We're out in the wild right now, and I just broke your cell. What if I left right now and took a taxi home? How are you going to survive out here? You can't call a taxi without your cell phone, and you can't open your car now that the keys are swimming with the fish. Do you want to go home? Well, fat chance. I'm going to leave you here where even the grass doesn't grow. It's a cemetery, so I'm sure you'll have lots of company at night. Leon then walked off with big strides. The woman was so scared that she shook like a leaf and cried. No, don't do this. I'm begging you. Chapter 3. The cemetery was located in a remote area to begin with. Leon was confident that there were no ghosts around, but he could not say for sure about the many rumors that wolves lurked around the area. The woman was wet after being hauled out from the river. She would not be able to walk far, since she was injured. Considering how far away the place was, it was almost certain that no one would go there to rescue her. For a woman whose car keys were thrown into the river and whose cell phone shattered, spending a night there would be more agonizing than death. Unfortunately for her, Leon had every intention of punishing her for her ungratefulness. Leon strode away. You jerk! Don't just leave me here! The woman tried chasing after Leon, but it was all in vain, as he left in a rage. She cursed wildly, and felt incredibly dejected, for she did not expect that a dignified young woman like her would suffer such treatment in the hands of an ordinary person. Bastard, once I find out who you are, I sure as hell will make you pay, the woman, whose name was Iris Young, shouted. As soon as she said that, Leon decided to ignore her firmly, even though he felt a little reluctant to act that way earlier. When Iris saw Leon disappearing from her sight, she felt like crying, but somehow could not shed even a single tear. The heel of her high heel snapped, and she shivered due to the cold wind because her body was still wet. She looked around warily as she sensed the eeriness of her surroundings. Even if there were no wolves around, there was no telling whether they might be any supernatural manifestations, since they were in a cemetery. She hated Leon with every fiber of her body, for she never suffered such mistreatment in all of her life as a pampered eldest daughter in her family. Leon, on the other hand, began to regret what he did within a minute or two after leaving. He was a good person, with a good heart, and without that goodness in him, he would not have saved an old elder Manson all those years ago, and endured all that torment the Mansons subjugated him to for so many years. When he lashed out at the woman earlier, he simply poured out all of his resentment toward Marilyn and Helen on the innocent Iris. His brief walk gave him the chance to calm down, especially since there was a gentle wind blowing on him. He thought to himself, she's a girl. Doing that to her would be crossing the line on my part. Even if she didn't encounter any wolves or ghosts, she'd still end up with a bad cold if she stayed out here all night. My conscience will eat away at me for the rest of my life if anything bad happens to her. Scaring her a little is enough. I shouldn't leave her here the entire night. Leon then turned around and went to find her. As soon as he arrived at the place where he left Iris, she was nowhere to be seen. Leon got anxious. He searched high and low for her, but found nothing except her high heels. It was not a good sign. Leon knew that something Iris was in trouble, and he soon heard Iris's faint cry for help. He ran over to the direction of the sound, and his anger returned once more. It turned out that the two thugs from before returned, and killing Iris was no longer their sole agenda. Anyone could guess that the men were feeling a little turned on when they returned, and saw Iris all wet and dripping. Iris was practically stripped bare already by the time Leon found her. At that point, he completely disregarded the fact that he was no match for those two men, and ran over to kick them. He then gazed down and saw that Iris was down to her last piece of clothing. As much as she tried to cover it, she was unable to hide the glowing fairness of her exposed skin. Leon's subconscious beamed at her delightful figure, and deemed her one of the most stunning women he had ever seen. At the very least, it was much better than Marilyn's figure when he peeped at her while she took a bath. Are you all right? The guilt-ridden Leon took off his clothes and threw them to Iris so she could cover her body. Iris hurriedly covered herself with the clothes, but she felt angry and helpless when she saw that her savior was Leon. Her hand took on a mind of its own and wanted to slap him in the face. But a scene she saw from the corner of her eye caused her to yell instead. Be careful, she warned, but it was already too late. The thug, clad in a black suit, was a robustly built man. By contrast, Leon had an ordinary build, and so failed to block the man. With a kick, the man sent Leon flying 2 or 3 meters away. He then took out the dagger he dropped earlier and sneered. Try to get yourself killed? The man in the black suit stepped on Leon's chest and raised the shining dagger to kill Leon. Behind him, the man who earlier tore off Iris's clothes and was kicked away by Leon urged, "Marco, the Youngs are powerful and won't be long before they track us both down. We can't waste any more time. Deal with them and don't make a single mistake." "That's rich coming from you," Marco thought, somewhat unhappily. After all, they would have ended Iris's life had the other guy not given in to those lustful impulses. However, it was not the time to be arguing about who was right, and Marco immediately stabbed Leon's chest with a dagger. Blood splattered everywhere. With his last dying breath, Leon gritted his teeth, grabbed Marco's thigh fiercely, and shouted at Iris, "Run! My life's not worth much, so it doesn't matter if I die. Save yourself! Don't worry about me!" Leon smiled bitterly at Iris before his impending death. As angry as he was deep down, he remained the honest Leon during the last moments of his life. He decided that he was not going to be that kind of person again in his next life. Leon's bitter smile encompassed a myriad of emotions, including sourness, desolation, and despair. Iris's delicate body was shocked stiff. She seemed to be able to read Leon's inner fragility and sadness through his smile, and it was a far cry from the brave and strong appearance he put on. Iris did not escape, but she knew that it was futile effort once Leon died. Upon seeing Leon's death, Iris's pretty face turned pale, and she slumped to the ground. Although Leon bullied her earlier, it was inevitable for her to feel sad when she saw him giving up his life to save her. At the same time, blood gushed out from Leon's chest and stained the pendant hanging around his neck. No one noticed the white glow on the pendant that began entering Leon's body from the wound. "I am an ancestor of the wolves, and my renown pales not against that of legendary deities. Should fate be upon any one of my descendants, they shall inherit what is contained within me." As he was about to die, a whole mess of jumbled-up information poured into Leon's mind. Moments later, he seemed to be returning toward the light, as his pale face turned abnormally red, and an unknown power coursed through his body. "You're next, Iris," the man in the black suit sneered, and walked toward Iris with a dagger. Iris sat paralyzed on the ground, with a look of despair and grief. "Behind you!" the other guy shouted angrily, but it was unfortunately too late. Leon picked up the dagger on the ground, stood up all of a sudden, and stabbed the man in the black suit from behind. "How?" The man in the black suit turned his head suddenly, stared wide-eyed at Leon, and collapsed to the ground with a thud. He was dead before he could even think. "How did you come back to life?" Chapter 4. Leon gained unlimited power after coming back to life, and although he could not master it right away, it was more than enough to deal with those two thugs. The remaining person was stupefied when he saw what happened, and Leon seized the opportunity to grab him before tumbling down into the water. Iris saw the whole thing and wondered if they were going to die together. A conflicted expression appeared on her face. The man might be annoying, yet he was willing to sacrifice his life to save her, even though their encounter that day was only by sheer chance. Iris's legs were already weak at that point, and she had to crawl to reach the water's edge. Her emotions were a complete mess because she was unsure whether or not she wanted Leon to resurface. He might have saved her, but her chaste body was touched and seen by him, not to mention the fact that he practically kissed her during the mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Iris bit her lip and waited, but he showed no signs of resurfacing. She wondered whether he died or survived and was unsure of his fate. Tears unconsciously welled up in her eyes, and nothing she did was able to stop them from coming. Moments later, she heard the sound of a car horn. The Young's bodyguard already commenced their search for her. She wore Leon's clothes and continued to wait. Once she confirmed that Leon did not come out of the water, she said gently to the river, "My name is Iris Young. Come and see me sometime." Iris turned around and left, but she did not know that Leon heard everything she said from underwater. Iris. What a beautiful name. After returning home, Iris seemed to have lost her mind as she ordered the group of bodyguards to go dive into the river and find Leon. In the end, however, no trace of him was found. All they knew was that his name was Leon Wolf, famously known as the son-in-law who lived like a dog with his wife's family. One of the bodyguards also found his ID card, which was said to have been discovered at the recycling center. Something just seemed off about this whole situation. Marilyn and Helen both waited outside the civil records office. From time to time, Marilyn raised her wrist to check the time on her watch. Her anger only increased with each passing minute. She already agreed with Leon to get their divorce finalized that morning, but it was almost noon, and Leon was still nowhere to be seen. Furthermore, Leon did not return home the entire night, and his cell was unreachable when she tried to do so earlier. She had no idea where he went, and had no means of contacting him at all. As Marilyn's impatience grew, Leon showed up at last. He was almost out of breath as he ran over from some distance away. His clothes were torn, and he looked like the epitome of embarrassment. After Leon bullied Iris, he came to discover that Iris was the daughter of an influential family. As a result, he did not dare to resurface from the water, and decided to lurk underwater instead. After Iris presumed him dead and spoke to the river, Leon could still sense that there were bodyguards searching the area, and thus decided to swim along the current and go downstream, but later fainted in the water because of everything he went through that night. By the time he woke up, it was already around 9 in the morning. He immediately remembered his divorce from Marilyn, which prompted him to rush over because he wanted to free himself from her as soon as possible. Marilyn, however, ran up to him and raised her hand to give Leon a resounding slap. "Where the hell did you go last night, you worthless piece of trash? Didn't I tell you last night that we're getting divorced this morning? It's almost noon now. Yeah, you're wasting so much of my time," Marilyn lambasted. "I was busy last night." Leon covered his face. How he wished he could slap her back if only he had the guts to do it. In the end, all he could do was grit his teeth and endure the humiliation. "What can a useless bastard like you possibly be busy with? Did you go out and sleep with someone else because you were angry with what happened last night?" Helen walked over, with a strange look on her face. "You're overestimating him, Mom. No woman is going to want trash like him, not unless they were blind. Even if he went looking for hookers, it's not like he has any money to pay them." Marilyn laughed mockingly. Leon's face turned ashen, then red, and he could not bring himself to look up due to the two women's mocking. "Not that it matters anyway. Seeing you makes me sick. Let's get this divorce done and over with." Marilyn snorted coldly before turning around and walking proudly toward the entrance of the civil records office. At that moment, Leon said awkwardly, "I don't think we can do that. My ID card is missing. When you kicked me out of the house yesterday, you threw all my belongings into the trash. My ID card was included in those documents, but neither of you noticed it. Now that it's sent to the garbage dump for incineration, there's no way to find my ID." "What?" A stunned Marilyn turned back to stare at Leon and said with a sneer, "You're just trying to use any excuse so you don't need to get a divorce, right? Who are you trying to fool by saying that you lost your ID card? Are you a man?" Helen then added, "Absolutely. If you don't want a divorce, just say so. Or do you enjoy being cucked? Maybe you're secretly happy to raise a child that's not yours." "I'm telling the truth. My ID card is missing. It's your fault, too. What does it have to do with me?" Leon clenched his fist tightly and got so anxious that his eyes turned red. As much as he would like to divorce Marilyn immediately, there was nothing he could do without his ID card. At that moment, two vehicles, a luxurious Porsche and a black Audi, stopped in front of Leon. When Porsche's door opened, a young man that was about 26 or 27 years old walked out of the car. He wore sunglasses instead of expensive designer clothes. Moments later, two bodyguards in suits and leather shoes stepped out of the Audi and followed after the young man in a dignified and pompous manner. It quickly attracted the attention of many passers-by. Everyone could tell at a glance that the young man must be some pampered rich kid. "Brody, you're here!" The Marilyn family looked happy, as if they changed, and greeted them flatteringly. Brody took off his sunglasses and put in airs as he asked arrogantly, "Didn't you say you were going to divorce your useless husband today? Why haven't you completed the divorce procedures yet?" "Boy, do I have news for you. This useless bastard deliberately came late this morning and stubbornly refused to get a divorce because he kept saying that he lost his ID card. Don't you think he's just ridiculous?" Marilyn glared fiercely at Leon. Who says you can't get a divorce without an ID card? I'm friends with the manager here. Come with me. I'll bring you to settle it. Brody hooked his hand intimately around Marilyn's slender waist, while glancing coldly at Leon. A murderous look flashed in his eyes as he said, I'm warning you, kid. You better go ahead with the divorce like a good boy. If you try to play tricks so you can hang on to Marilyn, I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. Hear that, idiot? Even if you don't have an ID card, my husband can still go make sure the divorce goes through. Let's see what nonsense you're going to come up with now. Marilyn smiled smugly at Leon and gave Brody a kiss on the cheek. The two of them then flirted with each other as they entered the building. No one could doubt that they were a terrible couple. Leon clenched his fist tightly, and his eyes were full of anger. Marilyn did not only cuck him, but even deliberately showed her affection to the man in front of him. Her ruthlessness knew no bounds. Leon, however, reminded himself that freedom was within reach, so he calmed himself down and strode into the civil records office behind Marilyn, Brody, and Helen.